The wind howled across the valley, ripping through the pine trees like a wild animal let loose. Snow lashed the mountainside, swirling in angry spirals that clawed at every branch, every stone, every breath. Somewhere beneath that furious sky, a lone figure pushed through the storm, her footsteps slow but steady, like a heartbeat refusing to give out. Lena Whitmore wrapped her coat tighter around her shoulders, though the threadbare fabric had long stopped keeping out the cold. Her boots sank deep into the snow with each step, pulling her down as if the mountain itself wanted her to turn back. But she wouldn't. Not yet. The firewood was nearly gone, and the storm wasn't supposed to hit until midnight. She had counted on those precious hours. Now the wind was screaming lies. Her hands, numb and red, gripped the worn axe handle strapped to her back. Her breath came in sharp clouds. She moved faster, deeper into the woods where dead trees still stood like skeletons, offering her a chance, just a small one, to make it through another night. Then she heard it, faint, weak, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. She froze, every instinct in her body sharpening. Another gust of wind roared through the trees, but there it was again, soft, broken, a groan, painful, human. Her heart pounded. "Hello," she called out, voice rough from the cold. No answer. She turned, eyes scanning the white around her. Nothing but snow. Her breath quickened. She took a step forward, then another, every nerve pulling her toward the sound. She didn't question why, she just moved. A few yards ahead, something broke the pattern of the snow, a dark shape, half buried. She ran. Dropping to her knees, Lena scraped at the snow with bare hands. Ice clung to her skin, slicing at her fingers. The snow gave way slowly, revealing a man, his face ghostly pale, lips blue, hair crusted with frost. "Hey," she shouted, shaking his shoulder. "Can you hear me?" He groaned barely. "Stay with me," she whispered, pressing her fingers to his neck. His pulse was faint, thready. His leg twisted at an unnatural angle, blood staining the snow beneath him. "God," she breathed. "Okay. Okay." She hooked his arm around her shoulder, heaving with everything she had. He was heavy, dead weight. Every step she took dragged both of them closer to collapse. The snow clawed at her legs, the wind tore at her face, but she didn't stop. She didn't even think of stopping. By the time she reached her cabin, she could hardly stand. She kicked the door open and stumbled inside, half falling with him into the warmth. The fire crackled softly, a flickering halo of orange in the gloom. She pulled off his frozen coat, wincing at the deep cut in his leg. Quickly, she gathered towels, blankets, hot water. She worked with the steady hands of someone used to fixing things with not enough time and not enough tools. When she wrapped the bandage around his wound, he winced, but didn't wake. She sat beside him for hours, listening to the fire, to the wind, to the silence between his breaths. And when his eyes finally opened, storm-gray and dazed, she was still there. "Where?" he whispered. "You're in my home," she said softly. "I found you in the snow." He blinked, slow, confused. "What's your name?" "Julian," he rasped. "Julian Ward." The name meant nothing to her, but somehow she knew it would mean everything. The cabin was quiet except for the slow crackle of firewood, the soft ticking of an old wall clock, and the occasional groan from the wind outside, like a tired beast pacing just beyond the door. Julian lay on the couch, his breathing shallow but no longer strained. His skin had warmed a shade, though his face still carried the haunted pallor of a man who'd nearly vanished into the snow. A folded blanket rested beneath his head, another draped across his chest. Near the fire, Lena sat in her usual chair, the one with the cracked wooden armrest and faded cushion. She hadn't moved in hours. She watched him. Not with suspicion, not with affection, with curiosity. Who was he, really? He didn't dress like someone used to hardship. The coat he'd worn, though now torn and blood-stained, had once cost more than everything in her kitchen combined. His boots, fine leather beneath the ice, weren't made for survival. They were made for show. And the watch he no longer had, the one she suspected had been stolen, it had likely been worth more than the land under her cabin. And yet here he was, lost, broken, human. She rose quietly and made tea, pine needle, bitter but warm. When she handed him the tin cup, his hands trembled as he accepted it. His fingers, though healing, still carried the bluish hue of frost. "What is it?" he asked, eyeing the drink. "Don't ask," she said with a half-smile, "just drink." He took a cautious sip, winced, then drank more. She watched his throat move, the pulse at his jawline. He looked younger now, less polished, more vulnerable, something in that made her uneasy. You said your name was Julian Ward, she said. He nodded slowly. Do you remember anything else? He closed his eyes, breathing through the silence. I remember cold, he said, the storm, then nothing. She leaned forward. How'd you end up here? He shook his head. I don't know. Lena studied him. Either he was lying or he truly didn't remember. She wasn't sure which scared her more. When she didn't answer, Julian looked at her. You saved me, he said. Why? She blinked at the question. Would you rather I hadn't? No, he said quickly. People don't usually do that. I'm not people, she said. Outside, the wind rose again, pressing against the cabin like a warning. Later that day, her grandmother returned from the nearby village, a small, wiry woman named Elsie with eyes sharp as a blade and a mind as unyielding as the Alaskan frost. The moment she saw Julian, her face hardened. You brought a stranger here? She asked, closing the door with a thud. He was dying, Lena said simply. Let the storm decide, Elsie muttered, taking off her gloves. Strangers bring trouble. Julian stirred from the couch, attempting to sit up. I don't mean any harm. Doesn't mean you won't cause it. Lena sighed. He stays until he's strong enough to leave. Elsie didn't argue, she just nodded once, slow and final. It was her way of saying she'd watch him, and she did. So did Lena. Day by day, Julian recovered. He spoke more, he asked questions. He tried to help, though his limp slowed him, and his hands, once meant for glass screens and boardroom pens, fumbled with the simplest tasks. Still, he tried, and Lena noticed. Noticed the way he flinched at the sound of helicopters overhead, the way his eyes darted to the door at night, the way he sometimes woke in a cold sweat, breath ragged, as if running from something only he could see. One evening, while they shared a modest stew by the fire, Julian whispered, I think someone took something from me. Lena paused. Like what? My watch, my wallet, my phone. All gone. You didn't have anything when I found you. I had them, he said firmly. I know I did. She met his eyes. Then someone left you out there to die. He looked at the flames and said nothing. But Lena could see it buried beneath the quiet, a storm of questions. Who had he trusted? Who had betrayed him? The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Lena said nothing more, but she didn't look away. And for the first time, Julian felt something deeper than warmth. He felt safe. The morning after the storm, the world outside had gone still, eerily so. Snow covered everything in thick, undisturbed layers, turning the forest into a painting of silence. Sunlight crept through the clouds like it was ashamed of being late, spilling gold onto the frost-covered trees. Inside the cabin, warmth crackled in the hearth, casting soft orange glows across the wooden walls. Julian sat up on the old couch, legs still stiff and bandaged, but his breath was deeper now, more certain. Lena was by the window, sharpening a small hunting knife with slow, practiced strokes. He watched her for a moment. Everything she did had purpose, measured, efficient, silent. How long was I out? He asked, his voice rough. She didn't look up. 3 days, maybe 4. His brows lifted. You kept me alive that long. Still, she didn't meet his eyes. Didn't have much choice, you wouldn't die. He let out a short breath, not quite a laugh. You make that sound like a disappointment. Finally, she glanced at him, expression unreadable. Not a disappointment, she said, just unexpected. Julian shifted his legs, wincing. I'm grateful. Lena said nothing, she just resumed sharpening the blade. A few minutes passed before he spoke again. I need to tell you something. No, she interrupted. Not yet. He blinked. You're still half frozen and limping. Whatever confessions you're holding onto can wait until you can walk without falling on your face. A beat of silence, then Julian grinned. That night, over a modest dinner of roasted roots and dried meat, Julian tried again. This time, Lena didn't stop him. My name is Julian Ward, he said. I'm the founder and CEO of Wardstone Holdings. She looked at him blankly. Big company, he added, almost sheepish. Real estate investments, offices in New York, Tokyo, Zurich. Lena chewed slowly, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. So, Julian blinked. So, I'm not just some guy who got lost on a hike. No, she said, you're a guy who almost died in a snowstorm because you weren't prepared. That silenced him. She continued, out there it doesn't matter who you are. Storms don't care about stock prices. Bears don't ask for credentials. He looked down at his bowl, her words settling like stones in his chest. Guess I needed to hear that, he muttered. Lena didn't smile, but something softened in her eyes. I figured you were someone important, she said. But up here, that doesn't mean much. You want to survive, you chop wood, you light fires. You earn your space. He nodded slowly. Then teach me, he said, her gaze sharpened, surprised, but she only said tomorrow if your leg doesn't give out. The next morning, Lena tossed a pair of gloves onto Julian's chest. Up, she said simply. Julian groaned, you're serious. Dead serious. With a grunt, he sat up and swung his legs over the side of the couch. The ache in his leg was still sharp, but he could stand, barely. He followed her outside, the cold morning air slapping him awake. A small pile of logs sat beside the chopping block. You're going to have me split these? He asked. Lena handed him the axe. Unless you want to freeze tonight. Julian stared at the axe. It felt heavy, awkward, not like the precision tools he was used to, the pens, the tablets, the touchscreen monitors. This was raw, rough, primal. He swung. The axe bounced. Lena chuckled under her breath. That log insult your stock portfolio or something. Apparently. She stepped forward, repositioned his grip, shifted his stance. Her hands were calloused but warm. Her touch steadied him more than the advice. Now try again. He did. This time the log split. He looked at the pieces, breathless, a small victory but a real one, and it felt good. They spent the morning like that, swinging, missing, trying again. Lena didn't praise him, but she didn't need to. She stayed close, giving short nods, the occasional muttered instruction. And Julian, to his own surprise, listened. Later that evening, as snow began to fall again, they sat by the fire. Lena was mending a tear in her coat. Julian watched her for a while, then spoke. Do you ever get tired of it? She didn't look up. Of what? This life, the cold, the work, the solitude. She pulled the thread tight before answering. Sometimes. But the quiet has its own kind of comfort. He nodded slowly. I've spent most of my life surrounded by noise. People, meetings, phones ringing, planes taking off. And somehow I felt lonelier than I do right now. Lena finally looked up. Her eyes held no pity, just understanding. That's because this place doesn't let you lie to yourself, she said. You can't hide behind anything. Not out here. Julian swallowed. I think I needed that. She didn't reply, but her gaze lingered on him a moment longer before returning to her sewing. The fire popped again. Julian leaned back, letting the silence wrap around him. Outside, the snow fell gently. Inside, something else was melting slowly but surely. They set out just after dawn, with the snow still fresh and the sky dusted in pale gray. Lena moved through the forest like a shadow, quiet, certain. Julian tried to match her pace but kept stepping on twigs, his boots crunching through layers of frost with every awkward step. They were hunting, or more accurately, Lena was hunting, and Julian was trying not to fall on his face. He had never done this before. He had never needed to. Every rustle in the bushes made his heart jump. Every gust of wind made him tighten his grip on the wooden bow she had handed him. You'll never catch anything if you keep walking like a man in a museum, Lena whispered, crouched beside a pine tree. I'm trying, Julian hissed back. They had tracked a rabbit for nearly half an hour. Lena finally nodded toward a small clearing where the animal stood, ears twitching. All right, she whispered, take your shot. Julian lifted the bow, hands shaking. He tried to breathe steadily to remember what she'd shown him, a line, anchor, release. He missed by a mile. Lena winced. Okay, that was painful. Julian lowered the bow, groaning. I'm not built for this. You're not built yet, she corrected. Come on, we'll try again. But they didn't get the chance. A silence fell across the woods, thicker than before. No birdsong, no rustling wind, just stillness. Lena froze. Julian noticed. What is it? Then he heard it, a low, guttural rumble. It wasn't the wind. Lena turned her head slowly and saw it. A massive grizzly bear, its fur matted with snow and mud, emerged from behind the trees. Its breath steamed in the cold, its dark eyes locked onto them. Too close, too big, too fast. Julian's blood ran cold. His legs wanted to move, but he couldn't. Don't run, Lena said, barely audible. Back away, slow. He did as told, every nerve in his body screaming. Then the bear huffed and charged. Julian stumbled backward. In the blur of motion, Lena shoved him behind a tree and in one fluid motion raised the rifle slung across her shoulder. The shot cracked through the air, loud and sharp, echoing across the trees. The bear skidded to a halt, startled. Its ears flattened. It let out one final huff, then turned and lumbered back into the forest, vanishing between the trees like a phantom. Silence fell again. Julian pressed himself against the bark, his chest heaving. Lena lowered the rifle, exhaled, then looked at him. You okay? She asked. His voice broke. That was the single most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. She smirked, slinging the rifle back over her shoulder. Welcome to Alaska. He let out a breathless laugh, half relief, half disbelief. And in that moment, as he looked at her steady hands, calm eyes, snow clinging to her braid, Julian realized something simple and undeniable. No one had ever risked their life for him before. Not his business partners, not the women he'd dated, not even the people who called him family, but Lena had, and she barely even knew him. That evening, the fire in the cabin burned lower than usual, but neither of them noticed. Julian sat at the wooden table, staring down at his hands, still shaking from the encounter in the woods. The cut on his palm from gripping the bow too tightly had stopped bleeding, but the memory hadn't stopped echoing. Lena sat across from him, wrapping a coil of twine around a small bundle of herbs. The room was quiet save for the faint crackle of the hearth and the distant wind brushing against the shutters. You ever been that close to death? Julian asked, voice low. Lena didn't look up. Plenty of times. He nodded slow. I haven't. A pause stretched between them. I thought I understood risk, he continued. I built a company from the ground up, negotiated billion-dollar deals, took on investors who could ruin me with a single call. He looked at her then, eyes dark with something rawer than regret. But none of it meant anything, not when I was staring at that bear, not when you stood between me and it. Lena set the herbs down. That's what survival feels like, it strips everything else away. He studied her, trying to find the words. I've spent my whole life being important, he said. In rooms full of important people making important decisions, but when you're out there, no one cares who you are. And for the first time, I didn't either. Lena's eyes softened. Maybe that's what you needed. Julian leaned back, letting her words sink in. He felt like a snow globe that had finally been shaken hard enough to see the pieces fall differently. I keep thinking about what you said, he murmured. She tilted her head, that my money won't light a fire, that it won't save me. He swallowed. You were right. Lena stood and crossed the room. She poured water into a kettle and set it over the fire. Then she turned back to him. You're still here, she said gently. So whatever you thought you needed to survive before, maybe that wasn't it. Julian looked into the flames, his voice barely audible. Maybe I don't know who I am anymore. Lena walked over and placed the small silver compass on the table between them, the one she always carried, once her father's. He looked down at it. It's broken, he said. No, she replied. It points true, but only when you know where home is. He reached out, brushing his fingers against the cool metal. And if you don't, then you're still searching. He looked up, met her eyes. And for the first time in a long, long time, Julian Ward didn't feel lost. Not because he had found the path, but because he had finally stopped pretending to know the way. The decision came without drama. One morning, as Lena packed dried meat into a jar and the wind whispered softly outside, Julian stood beside the hearth with a distant look in his eyes. He hadn't said it yet, but she could feel it coming. Like the way a storm shifts the air before the clouds break, he finally turned to her. I have to go back. She didn't flinch, didn't even pause. I know. He looked surprised. You do. You've been somewhere else every time you stare into that fire, she said, still sealing the jar. Somewhere colder than here. Julian exhaled. He hated that she understood him so well, hated more that she wasn't stopping him. It would have been easier if she had begged or gotten angry or told him he owed her more. But she didn't, because Lena never asked anyone to stay, not even him. I need to confront Marcus, he said. Finish what he started. Lena gave a quiet nod, her hands still moving. I figured. Julian stepped closer, lowering his voice. I'm not walking away from this, from you. From what we've built. We haven't built anything, she said simply. Not yet. That hurt more than he expected. Outside, the dogs barked. A sled waited. He pulled on the thick winter coat she had repaired for him, stitches still visible along the shoulder. When he zipped it up, it felt heavier than it had before. She followed him outside. The snow had fallen again in the night, blanketing everything in soft white. The sky was overcast, quiet. Martha was already there, arms folded, giving him a look somewhere between warning and reluctant respect. Be careful out there, city boy, she muttered. Julian nodded. I will. He turned to Lena. I don't know how long it'll take, but I'll come back. She didn't answer at first, Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver compass, the one her father had once used. She pressed it into his hand. "Find your way home," she said. He opened his mouth, but no words came. So instead, he gripped the compass tightly, nodded once, and climbed onto the sled. With a call to the dogs, they launched forward, snow kicking up around him. Lena watched until he vanished between the trees, and only then did she let herself feel it. The empty space where he'd stood. The return to New York was jarring, the noise, the lights, the speed, everything moved too fast, too loud. It felt like stepping into a world that had forgotten to breathe. But Julian didn't falter. He moved with purpose into his office, past the stunned assistant, and into the boardroom where Wardstone Holdings still bore his name. Marcus Keller was there, at the head of the table. His expression didn't change much when he saw Julian, just a flicker in the eyes, too quick for anyone else to notice. "Julian," Marcus said, standing, "my God. We thought you were dead," Julian interrupted. "You hoped I was." The room went still. Julian pulled the documents from his coat, his own signature forged, the acquisition pushed through during his disappearance. He tossed them onto the table. "You drugged me," he said. "You left me to die in the Alaskan wilderness." Marcus's smile faltered. "That's absurd. You were missing," Julian said. "Found half dead, no memory, and now I remember everything." Security entered the room. Julian gave them a nod. "Get him out." Marcus's voice cracked as they dragged him out. "You can't prove anything." "I already did," Julian called after him. "Enjoy prison." When the door slammed shut, silence followed. The kind that only truth leaves behind. Julian stood alone in a glass tower, surrounded by everything he had built, and he had never felt further from home. Over the next few weeks, he didn't return to his old life, he dismantled it. He stepped down as CEO, sold a portion of the company, and used the money to start something new, the Dawson Initiative, named not for a person but a place, a promise. A rural development foundation focused on communities like Keltara, places forgotten by maps but full of life. Places where people like Lena carried the weight of winter with quiet strength and never asked for praise. He built it for her, not as a gift, but as a mirror of everything she had unknowingly taught him. And then, one day, he wrote her a letter. Weeks later, Lena stood by the window of the cabin as a sled approached. A man she didn't recognize stepped off and handed her an envelope. It was Julian's handwriting. She opened it slowly, heart pounding. Inside were only a few words. "You showed me what home means. Now let me show you who I've become." A plane ticket to New York was tucked inside. Martha watched her from the doorway. "You going?" Lena looked down at the silver compass in her hand. "I don't know yet." But the next morning, she was gone. Lena had never seen so many lights in her life. New York stretched endlessly in all directions, glass towers scraping the sky, streets pulsing with people, yellow taxis darting like fireflies through the noise. Billboards flashed, horns blared. The city didn't breathe, it roared. She stepped out of the black car, boots clicking awkwardly against the marble of a hotel lobby too polished for comfort. The doorman had bowed. The driver had tipped his cap. Everyone seemed to be performing a role, everyone but her. In her coat of worn wool and her boots lined with reindeer hide, she looked like something carved from another century. She felt it too. As if she'd stepped into a world where her voice wouldn't carry, even if she shouted. But she didn't turn back. The elevator hummed as it rose. A quiet, sterile tune played from hidden speakers. She stared at her reflection in the metal doors. The same Lena, but not the same anymore. The doors slid open. Julian stood there in the middle of a room that felt more like a sculpture than a home. Glass walls, white marble, everything spotless, expensive, cold. But he wasn't cold, his eyes lit up the moment he saw her. Lena. She stepped out slowly. He was dressed in a tailored suit, clean-shaven, perfectly composed. The billionaire returned to his throne. But something in his eyes, something was different, warmer, softer. "You wrote to me," she said, voice low. "I told you I'd come back," he said, "but I couldn't, not like that." "Not yet." She looked around, taking in the penthouse view, the skyline, the river, the staggering height. "And you thought this would change my mind." "No," he said quietly. "I brought you here because I needed you to see what I used to be. And what I'm trying to become." She said nothing, just listened. Over the next few days, Julian showed her the city, but not in the way most men might. He didn't take her to fancy restaurants or glittering events. Instead, he brought her to construction sites funded by his new foundation. clinics being built in remote areas, rural internet infrastructure initiatives bearing a small plaque, Dawson Initiative. You named it after me, she asked, frowning. After the place that saved me, he said, and the person who reminded me what matters. She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. At night, they sat on the balcony overlooking the city. Julian told her about the boardroom battles he had fought to dismantle parts of his empire, about freezing bank accounts, starting over, getting it wrong, getting up again. I'm not perfect, he said one night. I'm probably still too proud, too used to power. But every day I try to be less of the man I was and more of the man I want to be. Lena sipped her tea, staring out at the skyline. And who's that? He looked at her. The man who doesn't just survive the storm, but walks back into it to find the one person who dragged him out. Silence stretched between them. Then, one evening, beneath the glow of Central Park streetlights, Julian finally said what had been building in him since that night she found him in the snow. I love you. Lena froze. He reached for her hand, his fingers warm, trembling slightly. I don't care about the company or the city or any of this, I just want you. But Lena didn't answer right away. Because part of her was still that girl from the cabin, the one who knew how easily words were spoken in warm rooms and forgotten in cold wind. So she looked him in the eye and said, If you love me, Julian, then prove it. He frowned, confused. How? She pulled the compass from her pocket, the one he had once held in his. Find your way home. The snow had returned to Kaltara, soft and unhurried, blanketing the world in silence once more. Lena stood outside the cabin, stacking firewood with mechanical precision. Her hands worked, but her mind was elsewhere, always drifting, always wondering. Weeks had passed since she left New York. Since she told Julian to find his way home, and he hadn't written, hadn't called, no sleds had appeared, no letters, nothing. She told herself she didn't care. But every morning her eyes flicked toward the trail leading through the trees. And every night her fingers curled around the compass in her coat pocket. He's not coming back, Martha said one evening, stirring the stew over the fire. I never said he would, Lena replied without looking up. Martha studied her. You like him. It doesn't matter. Maybe not to the world, Martha said softly, but it matters to you. Lena had no answer, so she kept working and waiting, without admitting that she was waiting at all. Then one morning she heard it. The low bark of dogs, the crunch of snow. She turned slowly. A sled appeared at the edge of the trees, simple, handmade, not the polished transport of city wealth. The man driving it wore a thick wool coat, boots worn and patched, gloves rough with use. It took her a moment to recognize him. Julian, not the Julian in a suit, not the one with polished shoes or $1,000 haircuts. This was a man with snow in his beard, a limp in his step, and calluses on his hands. He stopped a few feet from her, breath puffing in the air. I didn't bring a letter this time, he said. She stared at him, stunned. What are you doing here? I came back. Why? He swallowed, his voice steady. Because I don't want to be someone who disappears when things get hard. I don't want to love you from a distance. I want to be here, learn this life, earn it. She crossed her arms. You think it's that easy? No, he said. I think it'll be hard. I think I'll mess up a lot. But I also think the hardest thing is living in a world that doesn't feel like home. He stepped closer, pulled something from his pocket, the compass. I kept it with me every day. It only ever pointed one way. She stared at it, silent, then turned away. You know how to chop wood? A little. Hunt. Terribly. Clean fish. I gagged. She almost smiled, almost. I'm not here to impress you, he said gently. I'm here to belong. A long silence passed, then without a word she handed him the axe. Days passed. Julian worked. He fetched water from the frozen stream. He chopped wood until his arms ached. He learned to mend torn clothing. Cook over fire, patch the roof, fix traps. He listened, failed, tried again. The villagers watched. So did Lena. At first she kept her distance. But slowly she began to speak to him again. Show him how to check snare lines. How to tell weather from the shape of clouds. How to silence his steps on snow. He followed her without question. He didn't try to lead, he tried to understand. One evening they stood by the river watching the northern lights curl through the sky like silk. I still don't know if I belong here, Julian said. Lena didn't answer, he turned to her. But I know this is the only place I want to try. And that night, for the first time, she didn't turn away. The days grew longer, the snow softened. Spring whispered through the trees in small signs, melted edges on the roof, trickling streams beneath ice, and the way the light lingered just a little longer in the evenings. Julian didn't mark the change by calendar or phone. He felt it in his hands, rougher now, stronger, marked by splinters, by effort, by the slow rhythm of a life earned. He had stopped counting days, because what he was building wasn't a timeline, it was a life. He and Lena rarely spoke about what had changed between them. There were no grand confessions, no declarations under moonlight. There were simple moments, the way she handed him tea without asking, the way his hand brushed hers when they reached for the same pot, the way silence no longer felt like distance. One afternoon, she found him kneeling in the snow beside a broken fence post, tools spread out, brow furrowed in concentration. "You're fixing it wrong," she said. "I'm fixing it differently," he replied. She smirked. "It won't hold." He stood, brushing snow from his knees. "Then teach me." She did. Later, they sat on the porch, sipping broth from wooden cups, watching the sun dip behind the ridge. Julian turned to her. "I've been thinking about that night you found me," he said, "and all the ways I could have died." Lena didn't answer. "I've had a lot of success, money, influence, people who listen when I speak. But no one ever looked at me the way you did that night, not with fear or awe, just clarity, like you saw right through me." "I didn't see through you," she said quietly. "I saw you." He nodded slowly. "That was the beginning." She looked at him. "Of what?" "Of me." By summer, the foundation he had started, the Dawson Initiative, had opened its first outpost in a neighboring village. Education resources, medical supplies, local jobs. Julian traveled back and forth once a month, never staying more than 2 nights away. Every time he returned, Lena met him at the trail, not with words, just with her presence. One evening, they walked the riverbank together. The water was clearer now, the ice long gone. Julian skipped a stone, it bounced once, then sank. "That's about how good I was at fishing today," he muttered. Lena laughed genuinely. "You've improved, slightly." They kept walking. He stopped suddenly. "Lena." She turned, he held the compass in his palm. "I thought I came here broken, a man who lost everything." His voice softened. "But what I lost wasn't the company or the money, it was direction." He stepped closer. "You gave me that." She looked at him, eyes steady. "Julian, what are you saying?" He offered the compass to her. "I don't need this anymore." She frowned. "I want to stay," he said, "not as a guest, not as a visitor, but as a man who's found his way home." She didn't speak, didn't move, just looked at him, and then slowly she reached for his hand instead of the compass. Her fingers were rough, warm, real, and Julian knew. She didn't need to say yes, because she already had. Autumn came softly that year. The leaves turned gold and rust. The wind lost its bite but carried a different kind of weight, one that reminded people to gather, to prepare, to hold onto what mattered before the snows returned. Julian stood beside Lena outside the cabin, stacking bundles of firewood beneath the eaves. He wore an old flannel shirt, patched jeans, and a pair of boots that no longer looked out of place. His hands moved without instruction. So did hers. They worked in silence, the kind of silence that held trust. Later that evening, they sat by the fire. A stew simmered on the stove. Outside, the first frost had begun to touch the edges of the windows. Julian stirred his cup thoughtfully. "Do you miss it?" he asked. Lena raised an eyebrow. "Miss what?" "The city, the speed, the decisions." He paused. "Your old life." She smiled faintly. "I never had that life." Then she turned the question back at him. "And you, do you miss the boardrooms?" Julian shook his head slowly. "I think I miss the illusion of control more than anything. The feeling that if I signed enough papers, owned enough land, I'd be safe." He looked at her, "But that night in the snow, all I had was breath, and you." Lena looked into the fire. "I don't believe in fate," she said, "but I believe people come into our lives when something in us is ready." He reached across the table, gently took her hand. "So what are we ready for?" She didn't pull away. "Maybe," she said softly, "we're finally ready to stop surviving." The following weeks unfolded like chapters in a quieter book. Julian built a greenhouse beside the cabin, small, sturdy, efficient. Lena taught him how to preserve berries, how to mend a torn boot, how to read the sky better than any satellite. The Dawson Initiative expanded further north. Villagers came not just for supplies but for stories, for warmth, for a glimpse of something rare in the modern world: connection. And sometimes, when no one was watching, Julian would sit on the porch alone, the compass still resting in his pocket, not because he needed it, but because it reminded him of who he had become. One evening, as the first snow fell in fine, delicate threads, Lena stood beside him at the threshold of their home. He looked out at the forest, the trees swaying like old friends. "It's strange," he murmured. "The man who once ruled skyscrapers now finds peace in chopping wood." She smiled. "The man who once measured time and profits," she said, "now watches it pass in the way the seasons shift." They didn't kiss, they didn't cry. They just stood side by side, quiet and full. And so, Julian Ward, the man who once fell from a world of steel and mirrors, built something far more enduring. He didn't lose himself. He found the part he never knew he'd been missing. Lena, who once dragged a stranger out of the snow, didn't rescue a billionaire. She saved a man, and in return he brought her something just as rare. A partner, a purpose shared. A home not built of wood and stone, but of warmth and choice. Together, they lived a life where love wasn't a declaration.